My name is Nathan Bradley, and I am 34 years old. Nothing prepares you for the moment you find your 8-year-old son abandoned at a church, tears streaming down his face. Clutching a note that says your own parents left him there to teach you a lesson. All because I refused to give my brother $30,000. The rage I felt that day changed me forever. But what came next would shock us all. Before I continue my story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments, and please hit that like and subscribe button. You might want to grab some tissues because this family betrayal gets worse before it gets better. Growing up, I always knew my place in the family hierarchy. From as early as I can remember. My younger brother Cody was the golden child who could do no wrong, while I was the one who never quite measured up. Our parents, Howard and Martha Bradley, made no effort to hide their favoritism. When Cody brought home a B on his report card, he would get praise and a special dinner. When I earned straight A's, it was simply expected. That's what you're supposed to do, my father would say with a dismissive wave. This pattern continued throughout our childhood in suburban Boston. Cody got the newer clothes, the better birthday parties, and the lion's share of attention. Meanwhile, I learned early to be self-sufficient. By 13, I was mowing lawns around the neighborhood to save for the things my parents readily bought for my brother. By 16, I was working part-time at the local hardware store while maintaining honor roll status. Cody, on the other hand, bounced between hobbies and interests, never sticking with anything, but receiving endless support and resources for each new passion. When college applications came around, I received a partial scholarship to Boston University. But my parents made it clear that they wouldn't be contributing to my education. We need to save for Cody's future, my mother explained. Meanwhile, they fully funded Cody's education at an expensive private college, despite his mediocre grades. I worked 2 jobs through college and graduated with a degree in computer science. Carrying the weight of student loans but proud of my independence. After graduation, I landed a job at a tech firm and slowly built my career as an IT consultant. I met Allison during a project at her marketing company, and we fell in love quickly. She was brilliant, driven, and understood what it was like to make your own way in the world. When we married 3 years later, my parents attended the wedding but complained about everything from the venue to the food. Cody didn't even show up, claiming he had a can't-miss concert the same weekend. When Allison gave birth to our son Lucas, I felt a love I had never experienced before. Looking into his tiny face, I promised him silently that I would never make him feel second best. I would protect him, support him, and always put his needs first. My parents visited the hospital briefly, but seemed more interested in telling us about Cody's latest venture than meeting their new grandson. As Lucas grew into a bright, curious child, my marriage to Allison began to falter. The pressures of parenthood, career advancement, and the lingering effects of my upbringing created cracks in our relationship. We tried counseling, but ultimately decided to divorce when Lucas was 5. Despite the pain of our separation, Allison and I committed to co-parenting effectively. She moved to Seattle for a career opportunity, and we arranged for Lucas to spend school years with me and summers with her. As a single dad, I poured myself into creating a stable, loving home for Lucas. I advanced in my career to a senior consulting position that allowed me more flexibility to attend school events and be home in the evenings. I carefully managed our finances, setting up a college fund for Lucas and building an emergency savings account. Every decision I made centered around providing for my son's future. Throughout these years, my relationship with my parents remained strained but civil. They would occasionally visit, though these visits often left me emotionally drained. They rarely called to check on Lucas, and when they did, the conversations inevitably turned to Cody's latest endeavors. And there were many. Cody's post-college life was a series of false starts and failures. He cycled through jobs, relationships, and get-rich-quick schemes with alarming frequency. Each time he crashed, my parents were there to pick up the pieces, financially and otherwise. They paid off his credit card debt twice, covered the lease when he abandoned an apartment, and even bought him a new car after he wrecked his previous one driving under the influence. "He's just finding himself," my mother would say defensively whenever I expressed concern about their enabling. By the time Lucas was 8, I had created a life I was proud of. I had a good career, a comfortable home, and most importantly, a happy, well-adjusted son who knew he was loved. I maintained minimal contact with my parents and Cody, keeping our interactions brief and surface level. I thought I had found the right balance, a way to maintain family connections without allowing their toxicity to affect my son. I had no idea how wrong I was, or how far they would go to punish me for finally standing up to them. It began with a phone call on a Tuesday evening. Lucas was at the kitchen table working on his science project while I prepared dinner. When I saw Cody's name on my caller ID, I almost didn't answer. My brother rarely called unless he wanted something, and our last conversation months ago had ended with him berating me for not contributing to his failed food truck venture. Against my better judgment, I picked up. "Nathan, buddy! How's it going?" Cody's voice had that forced cheerfulness that immediately put me on edge. "Fine, Cody. What's up?" I kept my tone neutral as I stirred the pasta sauce. "Can't a guy just call to check on his big brother?" He chuckled, but I remained silent, waiting for the real reason. After an awkward pause, he continued, "Actually, I wanted to run something by you. An opportunity came up, a really solid investment with guaranteed returns." There it was. I sighed, glancing at Lucas, who was carefully gluing popsicle sticks together. "What kind of investment?" Cody launched into a convoluted explanation about a friend's import-export business, throwing around terms like exponential growth and ground floor opportunity. He spoke quickly, glossing over specifics but emphasizing the urgency. "So, I need some capital to get in," he finally said. "30,000 should cover it." I nearly dropped the wooden spoon I was holding. $30,000? Are you serious? It's not like I'm asking for a handout, Cody replied, his tone shifting from friendly to defensive. "It's an investment. You'll get it back plus interest. I know you've got money saved up." "Cody, I can't just give you $30,000. That's a significant amount of money, and I have Lucas to think about." "It's not giving, it's lending," he insisted. "And what about family? Don't you want to help your brother succeed?" Before I could respond, he added, "Look, let's discuss this in person. Mom and Dad want to have dinner on Friday. Bring Lucas. We can talk about it then." He hung up before I could refuse the dinner invitation. I stood in my kitchen, sauce bubbling on the stove, feeling a familiar knot of anxiety forming in my stomach. A few minutes later, my phone buzzed with a text from my mother. "Looking forward to family dinner Friday at 6. We miss Lucas." The message left no room for refusal without seeming petty. I texted back a brief confirmation, already dreading the evening. Friday arrived too quickly. Lucas was excited to see his grandparents, though they had never made much effort to be part of his life. I drove to my parents' suburban home with a sense of foreboding. The dinner started pleasantly enough. My mother had prepared Lucas's favorite mac and cheese, and my father asked about school. Cody arrived late, as usual, bringing an expensive bottle of wine but no apology for his tardiness. After Lucas finished eating, my mother suggested he watch TV in the living room while the adults talked. Once he was out of earshot, Cody launched into his pitch. "So, Nathan, have you thought about what we discussed?" he asked, refilling his wine glass for the third time. "I have, and the answer is no," I said firmly. "I'm not in a position to lend that kind of money." My father frowned. "What do you mean, no?" "Your brother is offering you a chance to help him and make some money yourself. Howard, Nathan has been doing very well in his career," my mother added. "Surely he can spare some money to help family." I took a deep breath. I've looked into this type of business, and it sounds like a high-risk venture at best. At worst, it could be a complete scam. Cody's face flushed with anger. Are you calling me stupid? You think I'd fall for a scam? I think you might not have done proper due diligence, I replied carefully. What's the name of this import-export company? Who runs it? What's their track record? My brother stammered through vague answers while my parents glared at me. I pulled out my phone and showed them what I'd found by simply searching the company name Cody had mentioned. Multiple warnings about this exact investment scheme popped up, along with stories from people who had lost thousands. This has all the hallmarks of a Ponzi scheme, I explained. They promise huge returns to attract investors, use new investments to pay early investors, and eventually disappear with everyone's money. You've always been jealous of your brother, my father accused, ignoring the evidence I'd presented. You can't stand to see him succeed. This isn't about jealousy, I countered. This is about making responsible financial decisions. The dinner devolved from there. Eventually, when my parents stepped into the kitchen to get dessert, Cody leaned across the table, his expression desperate. Look, I need to tell you the truth, he whispered urgently. I'm in trouble. I owe some guys money. Serious guys. They're not patient, Nathan. What guys? What did you do? I asked, alarmed. I borrowed money for a business thing that didn't work out. If I don't pay them back soon, they're going to hurt me. His eyes darted nervously toward the kitchen. Cody, if you're being threatened, you need to go to the police, not ask me for money, I said. The police? He laughed bitterly. These aren't the kind of guys you call the cops on. Please, Nathan. I'm desperate here. I can help you find legal help, I offered. I know a good lawyer who specializes in debt issues. I can connect you with financial counseling services. But I can't just give you $30,000. Cody's face hardened. I don't need a lawyer or counseling. I need cash. But hey, message received. Your precious money is more important than your brother's safety. My parents returned, and the rest of the evening was tense. As we prepared to leave, my mother pulled me aside. You need to help your brother, she insisted. That's what family does. We sacrifice for each other. Mom, the money he's asking for is part of Lucas's college fund and our emergency savings. I can't risk my son's future on Cody's scheme. So selfish, she murmured, shaking her head. You've always been so selfish. I buckled a sleepy Lucas into his car seat and drove home, a headache pounding behind my eyes. I knew this wasn't the end of it. When the Bradleys wanted something, they didn't give up easily. What I didn't realize was just how far they were willing to go to punish me for standing my ground. The week following the dinner was relentless. My phone rang constantly with calls from my parents and Cody. When I stopped answering, they left voicemails ranging from guilt-tripping to outright threatening. Your brother could be in real danger, and you're ignoring us? My mother's voice trembled dramatically. You've got until Friday to change your mind, or you'll regret it. Cody snarled in another message. I blocked their numbers, but the harassment continued. They created new email addresses to bypass my filters. My father even contacted some of my extended family members, spinning a tale about how I was refusing to help Cody in his time of need. Soon I was receiving messages from aunts, uncles, and cousins I barely spoke to, all urging me to do the right thing. On Wednesday, I was in the middle of a client meeting when my assistant interrupted to say my parents were in the lobby, insisting on seeing me immediately. I excused myself briefly to find them creating a scene, my mother in tears and my father red-faced with anger. Sir? I'm going to have to ask you to lower your voice, the security guard was saying as I approached. It's my right to see my son, my father shouted. Mom, Dad, what are you doing here? I asked, mortified as colleagues watched from a distance. You won't answer our calls, what choice did we have? My mother sobbed. I led them to a small conference room, closed the door, and faced them. This is my workplace. This is completely inappropriate. What's inappropriate is abandoning your family, my father retorted. Cody needs that money by Friday. These people aren't playing around. Then he should go to the police. I insisted. I've offered to help him find legal solutions, but I won't hand over Lucas's college fund. Always Lucas, 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 my mother said bitterly. What about your brother? Doesn't he matter to you at all? Of course he matters. But so does my son's future. And Cody's problems won't be solved by throwing money at them. He needs real help. After 20 minutes of circular arguments, I finally convinced them to leave by promising to think about it one more time. I returned to my meeting distracted and embarrassed, struggling to focus on the client's needs. That evening, Lucas noticed my stress as I picked at my dinner. Dad, are you okay? You look sad, he said. His blue eyes worried beneath his sandy brown hair. I forced a smile. Just some grown-up stuff, buddy. Nothing for you to worry about. Is it Grandma and Grandpa? They seemed mad at dinner. I hesitated, wondering how to explain the situation without burdening him with adult problems. Sometimes adults disagree about things, like how to help each other. I love Uncle Cody, but I disagree with Grandma and Grandpa about the best way to help him. Lucas nodded solemnly. Like when Miss Wilson says we should help Danny with math by teaching him, not just giving him the answers? I smiled at his simple wisdom. That's exactly right. Sometimes the best help isn't the easiest kind. Later that night, after tucking Lucas in, I received a frantic call from an unknown number. Against my better judgment, I answered. Nathan? It's Mom. You need to come to Memorial Hospital right away. Cody's been hurt badly. My heart raced as I arranged for my neighbor to watch Lucas, then drove frantically to the hospital. I rushed to the emergency department, only to find it empty of any Bradleys. A confused nurse confirmed they had no patient named Cody Bradley. It was a lie. Another manipulation tactic to get me to drop everything and respond to their demands. I drove home in a cold fury, relieved to find Lucas still sleeping peacefully. The next day, I received an alert from my bank about suspicious login attempts on my accounts. Someone had tried to access my online banking using failed password combinations. I immediately called the bank to secure my accounts and file a report. The customer service representative confirmed the attempts came from an IP address in my parents' neighborhood. They were trying to access my money directly. I felt sick as I strengthened all my passwords and added extra security measures. That evening, I received an email from Cody. You think your money is so safe? You think you can just ignore family when we need you? You're going to be sorry, Nathan. Really sorry. I forwarded the email to my lawyer, Matthew Simmons, along with documentation of all the harassment I'd experienced. He advised me to send a formal cease and desist letter, which I did immediately. The response was brief and chilling. My father replied to the legal notice with a single line. You'll regret choosing money over family. By Friday, I was exhausted and on edge. Lucas had picked up on my anxiety despite my efforts to shield him. I decided we both needed a break from the stress. How about we go camping this weekend? I suggested during breakfast. Just you and me, up at White Pine Lake. We can fish, hike, tell scary stories. Lucas's face lit up. Really? Can we make s'mores? Absolutely. Double chocolate if you want. We spent Friday evening packing our gear, and for the first time that week, I felt the knot in my stomach begin to loosen. 2 days away from self-service emails, and family drama was exactly what we needed. I had no way of knowing that my parents were already plotting their revenge, and that Lucas would be their target. Monday morning arrived with the familiar rush of school preparation. Lucas wolfed down his breakfast while I packed his lunch, both of us refreshed from our weekend in nature. Don't forget your science project, I reminded him, handing over the carefully crafted solar system model we'd finished before our camping trip. Got it. Lucas carefully placed it in a box. Mess. Peterson's going to give us extra credit if we can name all the moons of Jupiter. And can you? I asked, smiling as I grabbed my car keys. Europa, Ganymede, Callisto, Io. He recited proudly. Plus there's like 60 smaller ones. That's my boy, I said, ruffling his hair as we headed to the car. I dropped him off at the elementary school entrance, watching as he joined the stream of children heading inside. Have a great day, buddy! I love you! He turned to wave, his backpack nearly as big as he was. Love you too, Dad! I had just arrived at my office when my phone rang. It was Jordan Reynolds, my biggest client, and he sounded panicked. Nathan, we've got a situation. The entire system is down. And we're losing thousands by the minute. We need you here now. I glanced at my schedule. I had client meetings all afternoon. But nothing that couldn't be rescheduled for an emergency of this magnitude. I'll be there in 20 minutes, I promised, already packing up my laptop. As I rushed to my car, my phone buzzed with a text. It was from my mother. We're in town and want to make peace. Let us pick up Lucas from school and take him for ice cream. We can bring him to your house after. I hesitated. Things had been so toxic, but they were still Lucas's grandparents. Maybe they genuinely wanted to make amends. And with this client emergency, it would actually help to have someone pick up Lucas from school. His after-school program ended at 5:30, and I had no idea how long this crisis would take to resolve. After a moment's deliberation, I replied, Okay. He gets out at 3:15. Please have him home by 6 for dinner. My mother responded with a thumbs-up emoji, and I drove to my client's office, pushing aside my lingering concerns. The system crash was even worse than described, and I lost myself in code and troubleshooting for hours. It was nearly 5:30 when I finally had the system back online. Jordan thanked me profusely, and I headed home, looking forward to hearing about Lucas's day and his visit with his grandparents. When I pulled into my driveway at 5:45, I was surprised to see no other cars. I checked my phone, no messages. Maybe they were running late. By 6:15, with no word from my parents, I began calling. No answer. I texted repeatedly, growing increasingly concerned. By 6:30, I was pacing my living room, considering calling the police, when my phone rang. Hello? Mom? I answered immediately. Is this Nathan Bradley? An unfamiliar male voice asked. Yes, who's this? This is Pastor Michael Donovan from Grace Community Church. I have a young boy here who says he's your son, Lucas. My blood ran cold. What? Is he okay? What happened? He appears physically fine, but quite upset. He says his grandparents left him here about 3 hours ago. One of our volunteers found him crying on the steps. 3 hours ago? I gasped, already grabbing my keys. I'm coming right now. Please stay with him. I drove to the church in a blur of panic and rage, running every red light on the way. When I burst through the doors, I found Lucas sitting in a small office, clutching a juice box, his eyes red from crying. When he saw me, he launched himself into my arms. Dad! You came! He sobbed against my shoulder. Of course I came, buddy. I'm so sorry. So sorry. I held him tightly, my own tears threatening to fall. Pastor Donovan, a kind-faced man in his 50s, stood nearby. He had this note with him, he said quietly, handing me a folded piece of paper. I opened it with one hand, keeping the other firmly around Lucas. The note read, Nathan, now you know what abandonment feels like. When you're ready to do the right thing for your family, call us. Until then, we thought you should experience what it's like when someone turns their back on you. Mom and Dad. White-hot fury surged through me. They had used my innocent child as a weapon in their twisted game. "Lucas, what happened?" I asked gently, trying to keep my voice steady. Between hiccuping sobs. He told me how his grandparents had picked him up from school, promising ice cream. Instead, they drove him to this church in a neighborhood I wasn't familiar with. "Grandma said to wait on the steps, that you were coming to get me because you had a surprise," he explained. "They said don't move because you might miss me. But you didn't come and it got cold." And I was scared. "Did anyone else see them leave you here?" Pastor Donovan asked. Lucas nodded. A lady was watering flowers by the sign. She waved at us. The pastor nodded. "That would be Mrs. Coleman. She volunteers with our landscaping. And we have security cameras covering the entrance." I thanked the pastor profusely for looking after Lucas and promised to follow up. Then I carried my still trembling son to the car, settling him in the back seat with my jacket wrapped around his shoulders. As I drove home, checking the rearview mirror constantly to make sure he was okay, I made 2 silent promises. First, that I would do everything in my power to make sure Lucas never experienced that kind of fear again, and second, that my parents would face consequences for what they had done. I called the police as soon as we got home. Officer Rebecca Martinez arrived 20 minutes later, gently questioning Lucas about what happened while I sat beside him, my arm around his shoulders. She took detailed notes, photographed the note, and assured us she would file a report immediately. "What they did constitutes child abandonment and endangerment," she explained. "We'll need statements from the church staff and any security footage they can provide." After she left, I made Lucas his favorite dinner, though either of us had much appetite. That night, he asked to sleep in my bed, something he hadn't done since he was 5. As he finally drifted off, clutching his stuffed dinosaur, I lay awake, listening to his breathing and silently weeping with a mixture of relief, guilt, and rage. In the darkness, my phone lit up with a text from my father. "Ready to talk about that loan yet?" I didn't reply. There were no words for what I was feeling, and anything I said would only fuel their delusion that their actions were somehow justified. Instead, I forwarded the message to Officer Martinez as further evidence of their malicious intent. Lucas woke screaming from nightmares twice that night. Each time, I held him, assured him he was safe, and promised him that what his grandparents did was wrong and would never happen again. By morning, my path forward was clear. This wasn't just about standing firm against financial manipulation anymore. This was about protecting my son from people who had proven they would hurt him to get what they wanted. No matter that they were family, they had forfeited any right to that title when they abandoned an 8-year-old child to teach me a lesson. As Lucas finally fell into a peaceful sleep near dawn, I made my 3rd promise of the night. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The days following Lucas's abandonment were focused entirely on his well-being. I took emergency leave from work, called his school to explain the situation, and found a child psychologist specializing in trauma. Dr. Sarah Winters met with us the very next day, her gentle manner immediately putting Lucas at ease. "What your grandparents did was wrong," she told him directly during that first session. "None of this was your fault, and your dad is doing everything right to keep you safe." Those simple statements seemed to lift a weight from Lucas's small shoulders. In the privacy of the waiting room, Dr. Winters was equally direct with me. "This was a significant trauma for a child his age," she explained. "Abandonment touches on primal fears. He'll need consistent support, honest communication, and a strong sense of security as he processes this." I nodded, fighting back tears. "Whatever he needs, whatever it takes." "And you?" she asked. "Who's supporting you through this?" The question caught me off guard. I'd been so focused on Lucas that I hadn't processed my own feelings beyond the initial rage. I'll be fine," I stammered. "Dr. Winters gave me a knowing look. "Parents often put their own needs last, but Lucas needs you at your strongest. Consider finding someone to talk to. You've experienced a betrayal of trust too. I promised to think about it, though my immediate focus remained on practical matters. My next stop after the therapy session was Matthew Simmons's law office, where I laid out everything that had happened. Matthew, a normally unflappable professional, looked genuinely shocked as I showed him the note my parents had left with Lucas. "This goes well beyond a family dispute, Nathan," he said gravely. "They deliberately endangered a child. We need to file for an emergency restraining order immediately. And I strongly recommend pressing criminal charges." Within hours, he had prepared the paperwork for a temporary restraining order, which a judge granted that same day. The order prohibited my parents and Cody from coming within 500 feet of Lucas, our home, or his school. "This is temporary," Matthew explained. "We'll have a full hearing in 2 weeks where the judge will decide whether to make it permanent. In the meantime, I've spoken with the district attorney's office. They're reviewing the police report and church security footage to determine criminal charges." That evening, as Lucas and I were working on a puzzle to keep his mind occupied, my phone exploded with notifications. My mother had posted a lengthy diatribe on Facebook, painting herself and my father as the victims of my vicious lies and legal harassment. According to her revisionist history, they had simply taken Lucas for ice cream and left him at the church for just a few minutes to use the restroom, returning to find him gone because I had picked him up without telling them. The comments section was a battlefield, with extended family members and old family friends taking sides. Some expressed shock at my parents' actions, while others condemned me for tearing the family apart and using the legal system against my own parents. I resisted the urge to respond directly. Instead, I methodically documented every post, comment, and message, adding them to the growing file of evidence. The next day brought another surprise. Allison called. Lucas's school had contacted her about his sudden absence, and she was frantic with worry. "Nathan, what's going on?" "The school said there was a family emergency." I hadn't spoken to her beyond our regular co-parenting check-ins in months, but I found myself pouring out the whole story: Cody's demand for money, my refusal, the escalating harassment, and finally, the abandonment. "I'm coming," she said immediately. "I'll be on the next flight to Boston." "Allison, you don't have to. He's my son too, Nathan. And you shouldn't be handling this alone." True to her word, she arrived the following morning. When Lucas saw her at the door, he burst into tears and ran into her arms. Something in me broke at the sight, and for the first time since the ordeal began, I allowed myself to truly feel the magnitude of what had happened. Allison stayed at a nearby hotel but spent every day with us. Her presence was steadying, both for Lucas and, surprisingly, for me. Despite our divorce, we had always been united in our commitment to Lucas's well-being, and having her beside me as we navigated this crisis felt right. Together, we established a new routine for Lucas. Therapy 3 times a week, homeschool lessons we arranged with his teacher, and plenty of normal childhood activities to reassure him that life would continue. Slowly, the nightmares became less frequent, though he still struggled with separation anxiety, panicking if I was out of sight for too long. A week after the incident, my parents escalated their campaign. Despite the restraining order, they showed up at Lucas's school, telling the front office they were there for Grandparents' Day. Thankfully, the school had been alerted to the situation and immediately called the police. My parents left before officers arrived, but the incident shook Lucas when he heard about it. "Why do they keep trying to see me if they didn't want me?" he asked that night, his voice small in the darkness of his bedroom. "It's complicated, buddy," I said, searching for words an 8-year-old could understand. "Sometimes adults do wrong things because they're focused on what they want, not on how their actions hurt others. But I promise you, this isn't about you not being wanted. This is about them trying to control me, and using you was wrong." "Are they going to jail?" he asked. "I don't know," I answered honestly. But they are going to face consequences for what they did. And more importantly, we're going to make sure they can't hurt you again. The district attorney, Elena Rodriguez, called 2 days later to inform us that they were pressing charges against my parents for child endangerment and abandonment. Cody wasn't being charged, as there was no evidence he was directly involved in the abandonment, but he remained covered by the restraining order due to his threatening messages. We have strong evidence, DA Rodriguez explained. The church security footage clearly shows your parents leaving Lucas alone on the steps. The timestamp indicates he was there for nearly 3 hours before being found. Combined with the note they left and their subsequent text messages, their intent is clear. With the criminal case proceeding and the restraining order hearing approaching, I hired a private investigator to look into Cody's claimed financial troubles. If my parents tried to argue they were acting out of desperate concern for their son, I wanted to know the truth about his situation. What the investigator uncovered was illuminating. Cody had indeed borrowed money from some unsavory characters to fund a luxury vacation to Europe with his girlfriend. His desperate situation was largely self-created. And while the people he owed money to had threatened legal action, there were no threats of violence. As the date for the restraining order hearing approached, I received an unexpected call from my Aunt Julia, my mother's sister who I'd always been close to growing up. Nathan, I need you to know that not all of the family supports what Howard and Martha did, she said, her voice trembling. What they did to that sweet boy is unforgivable. I've told them as much. And now they're not speaking to me either. Her support meant more than I could express. She asked if she could visit Lucas, and after checking with Dr. Winters, I arranged a carefully supervised visit. Seeing Lucas light up in the presence of a family member who genuinely cared for him reinforced that cutting off my parents didn't mean depriving him of family. The day before the hearing, I received a formal letter from my parents' attorney, Bernard Wells, a family friend who had known me since childhood. The letter proposed a settlement. If I would drop the restraining order and criminal charges, they would issue a formal apology and agree to supervised visitation with Lucas in the future. There was no mention of Cody's supposed financial emergency or the $30,000. I showed the letter to Matthew, who scoffed. This isn't a civil dispute that can be settled with an apology. They committed a crime against a child. The DA will proceed regardless of what you want at this point. I knew he was right. But part of me, the part that still remembered birthdays and Christmases before Cody was born, when my parents seemed capable of love, felt a pang of grief for the family relationships that were being permanently severed. That evening, as Allison and I sat on my porch after Lucas had gone to bed, I confessed this feeling to her. Does it make me weak that part of me still wishes things could be different? I asked. She shook her head, her eyes soft in the porch light. It makes you human, Nathan. Recognizing the loss doesn't mean you're making the wrong choice. You're protecting our son. And that's all that matters. As we sat in companionable silence, watching fireflies in the summer evening, I felt a strange sense of peace descend. Tomorrow would bring the confrontation I'd been dreading, but tonight, with Lucas sleeping safely upstairs and Allison's steady presence beside me, I knew with absolute certainty that I was doing the right thing. No amount of family pressure or cultural expectations about blood being thicker than water could change the simple truth. My first duty was to protect my child. And I would walk into that courtroom tomorrow with my head held high, ready to ensure Lucas would never again be used as a pawn in my family's manipulative games. The morning of the hearing dawned bright and clear. A beautiful summer day that belied the storm brewing inside the Suffolk County Courthouse. Allison agreed to stay home with Lucas, who was still struggling with anxiety and didn't need the added stress of seeing his grandparents or the judicial proceedings. Matthew met me on the courthouse steps, his briefcase in one hand and a confident smile on his face. We're well prepared, he assured me. The evidence is overwhelming. and Judge Harriet Collins has a strong record of prioritizing child welfare. As we entered the courtroom, I saw my parents sitting at the respondent's table with Bernard Wells. My mother's eyes were red-rimmed, and she had dressed in conservative clothing that made her look older and more vulnerable than she actually was. My father sat rigidly beside her, his expression a mask of indignation. To my surprise, Cody was also present, sitting directly behind them, looking uncomfortable in a suit that was slightly too small. D.A. Rodriguez approached us before the proceedings began. "I'll be observing today," she explained. "The criminal case is separate, but I want to see how this plays out." The judge's findings here could influence our approach. Judge Collins entered, and the hearing was called to order. Matthew presented our case first, methodically laying out the events leading up to Lucas's abandonment, including Cody's demand for money, my parents' escalating harassment, and finally, the abandonment itself. The security footage from the church was particularly damning. The silent video clearly showed my parents' car pulling up to the church, Lucas being led to the steps by my mother, and then both adults driving away, leaving him alone. The timestamp showed they left at 3:34 p.m., while Lucas wasn't found until nearly 6:30 p.m. Pastor Donovan testified about finding Lucas, describing his distressed state and the note my parents had left. When Matthew introduced the note as evidence, a murmur ran through the courtroom. "Your Honor, this note clearly demonstrates that the respondent's actions were deliberate and intended to cause emotional distress," Matthew argued. "They explicitly state they wanted Mr. Bradley to know what abandonment feels like. They used an 8-year-old child as a weapon in a family dispute. When it was Bernard Wells's turn to present, he attempted to paint a picture of concerned grandparents driven to desperate measures by my supposed abandonment of the family. The Bradleys have been pillars of their community for decades," he began. "Their younger son, Cody, found himself in a dangerous situation, owing money to potentially violent individuals. When Nathan refused to help, despite having the means to do so, they felt they had no choice but to try to shake him out of his selfishness. Are you suggesting that abandoning a child is an appropriate response to a financial disagreement, Mr. Wells?" Judge Collins asked sharply. Wells backpedaled. "No, Your Honor. My clients acknowledged their methods were misguided, but they never intended to leave the child for more than a few minutes. They simply wanted to make a point and then return. Yet the video shows they made no attempt to return for nearly 3 hours," the judge noted. "There was a misunderstanding about who would return," Wells claimed. "Mrs. Bradley thought her husband was going back, while he believed she had already arranged for Nathan to pick up the child." My mother nodded vigorously at this explanation, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. When my parents took the stand, their testimony was a masterclass in revisionist history and deflection. My mother claimed they had only left Lucas for a few minutes to teach me a small lesson about family responsibility. My father insisted they had called me multiple times to make sure I was on my way to pick up Lucas, though phone records Matthew introduced showed no such calls. The turning point came when Matthew asked about the note. "Mrs. Bradley, this note explicitly states you wanted your son to know what abandonment feels like. How does that align with your claim that you only intended to leave Lucas alone briefly?" My mother flustered. "The note was Cody's idea. He wrote it, not us." Matthew raised an eyebrow. "So you're stating under oath that Cody Bradley wrote this note?" "Yes," she insisted. "He was very upset with Nathan's refusal to help him." Matthew turned to the judge. "Your Honor, we'd like to call Cody Bradley to the stand." Cody looked panicked as he was sworn in. Under Matthew's questioning, he initially tried to support his mother's claim about the note. But when confronted with handwriting samples and the threat of perjury charges, he crumbled. "Fine, my mom wrote the note," he admitted. "But this whole thing was their idea, not mine. I just needed the money." "And why did you need $30,000 so urgently?" Matthew pressed. Cody squirmed. "I had some debts to pay off. Gambling debts? Drug debts? No. Nothing like that, he muttered. In fact, our investigation shows you borrowed money to fund a luxury vacation to Europe with your girlfriend, isn't that correct? And when you couldn't repay it, you were threatened with a lawsuit, not violence. Cody's face reddened. Yeah, but Nathan could have helped me if he wanted to. He's always been the favorite, always had everything work out for him. A shocked murmur ran through the courtroom at this statement, so at odds with the reality of our childhood. The final witness was Dr. Winters, who testified about Lucas's trauma. Lucas is experiencing significant symptoms of abandonment trauma, she explained. Nightmares, separation anxiety, hypervigilance. He's afraid to be alone. Afraid his father won't come back for him. The deliberate nature of the abandonment by trusted family members has created a profound rupture in his sense of safety. And in your professional opinion, would continued contact with the grandparents be in Lucas's best interest? Matthew asked. Absolutely not, Dr. Winters stated firmly. Any contact would likely re-traumatize him and undermine the therapeutic progress we've made. During closing arguments, Bernard Wells made a last-ditch appeal for family reconciliation, arguing that a permanent restraining order would destroy any chance of healing this family rift. Matthew's response was measured but powerful. Your Honor, this case isn't about a family rift. It's about the deliberate endangerment of a child. The respondents have shown no genuine remorse for their actions. Instead, they've attempted to minimize what they did, shift blame, and even commit perjury. Lucas Bradley deserves to feel safe, and that safety can only be guaranteed by keeping these individuals out of his life. Judge Collins announced she would review all evidence and deliver her decision in 3 days. Those 3 days were among the longest of my life. Lucas continued to improve with therapy, and Allison's presence was a tremendous help, but the uncertainty weighed heavily on all of us. On the morning of the decision, Allison surprised me by offering to come to court. You shouldn't face this alone, she said simply. The courtroom was tense as Judge Collins entered. My parents looked confident, having clearly convinced themselves that family ties would trump their actions. Judge Collins wasted no time with preliminaries. After careful consideration of all evidence and testimony presented, I find the actions of Howard and Martha Bradley constitute a clear and deliberate endangerment of their grandson, Lucas Bradley. The security footage, the note left with the child, and the subsequent attempts to minimize their actions all point to individuals who place their own agenda above the welfare of a vulnerable child. She looked directly at my parents. What you did was not a small lesson or a misunderstanding. You abandoned an 8-year-old child for hours in a location unfamiliar to him, with the explicit intention of causing emotional distress to your adult son. That you would use a child this way speaks to a profound lack of judgment and moral compass. My mother began to sob, while my father's face hardened into a mask of anger. Therefore, I am granting a permanent restraining order prohibiting Howard Bradley, Martha Bradley, and Cody Bradley from coming within 500 feet of Lucas Bradley, his home, school, or any location where he might reasonably be expected to be present. This order will remain in effect until Lucas reaches the age of 18, at which point he may decide for himself whether to have contact with the respondents. She continued, additionally, I am referring this case to family court with a strong recommendation against any petition for grandparent visitation rights. The respondents have demonstrated they cannot be trusted to prioritize the child's well-being. Judge Collins then turned to address the district attorney. Ms. Rodriguez, the court recognizes your presence here today. The evidence presented clearly supports the criminal charges of child endangerment and abandonment. This court encourages the prosecution to proceed with all appropriate charges. The gavel fell with finality, and it was over. I felt a strange mixture of relief, vindication, and grief. Beside me, Allison squeezed my hand in silent support. As we exited the courtroom, my father attempted to approach us, his face twisted with anger. This isn't over, Nathan. No son does this to his parents and gets away with it. A court officer immediately stepped between us. Sir, the restraining order is now in effect. Please step back. My last image of my father was of him being led away by Bernard Wells, his shoulders rigid with indignation, still believing himself the wrong party despite all evidence to the contrary. Outside the courthouse, reporters had gathered, somehow having gotten wind of the unusual case. Matthew deftly fielded their questions while Allison and I slipped away through a side exit. In the car, I finally allowed myself to feel the full weight of what had happened. I never thought it would come to this, I said quietly. Growing up, no matter how bad things got, I never imagined completely cutting them out of my life. You didn't choose this, Nathan, Allison reminded me. They did. Every step of the way, they chose their actions. You're just protecting our son, exactly as you should. As we drove home to tell Lucas that he was officially safe from his grandparents, I realized that Allison was right. I hadn't destroyed my family. My parents had done that themselves, through years of favoritism, manipulation, and finally, an unforgivable act of cruelty toward an innocent child. The family I needed to focus on now was the one waiting at home, my son, and perhaps, in some new configuration, Allison. The three of us had weathered this storm together. And whatever the future held, I knew we would face it with the same unity and strength. 3 months after Judge Collins granted the permanent restraining order, we returned to the courthouse for my parents' criminal sentencing. The district attorney had pursued charges vigorously, and after seeing the overwhelming evidence, my parents had finally accepted a plea deal rather than face a jury trial. Lucas remained at home with a trusted babysitter. Though he was doing much better in therapy, Dr. Winters had advised against exposing him to the courtroom environment. Allison, who had extended her stay in Boston indefinitely, sat beside me in the gallery, a steady presence through the entire ordeal. Judge Montgomery, a stern-faced man in his 60s, reviewed the case details before addressing my parents directly. Howard and Martha Bradley, you have pleaded guilty to child endangerment and abandonment, serious offenses that typically carry jail time, he began. However, given your ages, lack of prior criminal history, and the terms of the plea agreement, I am sentencing you each to 2 years of probation, 200 hours of community service specifically working with organizations supporting neglected children, and mandatory counseling. My father nodded stiffly, while my mother dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. Additionally, the judge continued, you will pay restitution covering all therapy costs for Lucas Bradley, past and future, related to the trauma caused by your actions. You will also return the $5,000 you withdrew from Lucas Bradley's college fund without authorization. This last part was a shock to me. The private investigator had discovered that my parents had accessed Lucas's college account, which they had occasionally contributed to and were still listed as authorized users. They had withdrawn money just before abandoning him, apparently believing they were entitled to reclaim their gifts. I want to be very clear, Judge Montgomery concluded, his voice hardening. You are fortunate to avoid incarceration. Your actions were calculated, cruel, and could have resulted in serious harm to your grandson. The court finds your continued lack of genuine remorse particularly disturbing. This sentence is not merely punitive but designed to provide you with perspective on the severity of your actions. As we left the courtroom, I felt no satisfaction in their punishment, only a profound sadness that it had come to this. Allison seemed to sense my mood. It's okay to feel conflicted, she said as we drove home. They're still your parents. That's just it, I replied. Biologically, yes. But parents are supposed to protect, not harm. They failed at the most fundamental level. Not just with Lucas, but with me too. When we arrived home, Lucas was playing a board game with the babysitter, laughing in a way that had become rare since the abandonment. Seeing him slowly reclaiming his childhood joy was the only vindication I needed. The weeks following the sentencing brought unexpected developments. First came a letter from Cody, postmarked from Chicago. "Nathan," it began, "I've moved away from Boston and Mom and Dad. What they did to Lucas was unforgivable, and I can't be around them anymore. I'm not asking for forgiveness, I don't deserve it. I was selfish and entitled, and I let my jealousy of you blind me to what really matters. I've started therapy and gotten a real job. Maybe someday, years from now, you'll let me try to be the uncle Lucas deserves. Until then, I'll respect the restraining order and your wishes. Cody." I showed the letter to Allison, unsure how to feel about this apparent change of heart. "People can change," she said thoughtfully. "Not everyone, but some. Time will tell if he's sincere." I decided not to respond immediately, filing the letter away to revisit when emotions weren't so raw. My parents, in contrast, remained entrenched in their perspective. They complied with the court orders but continued to portray themselves as victims on social media and to family members. Aunt Julia kept me informed of their narrative, that I had weaponized the legal system against them over a simple misunderstanding, and destroyed the family out of greed and spite. No one with any sense believes them. She assured me over lunch one day, "Anyone who's spent 10 minutes with Lucas knows what a wonderful father you are." As summer turned to fall, Lucas started 3rd grade. His anxiety had diminished significantly, though certain triggers, being picked up late from school, for instance, could still set off a panic response. Dr. Winters had given us techniques to manage these moments, and each successful navigation built his confidence. "Dad," he asked one evening as I tucked him in, "are Grandma and Grandpa bad people?" I chose my words carefully. "I don't think most people are all good or all bad, buddy. Grandma and Grandpa made some very bad choices that hurt you. And they haven't shown that they understand how wrong those choices were. That's why they can't be part of our lives right now. Will I ever see them again? That will be your choice when you're older," I told him honestly. "But not until you're an adult and can decide for yourself. Until then, my job is to keep you safe." He nodded thoughtfully. "I'm glad you're my dad. I'm glad you're my son," I replied, kissing his forehead. "The very best thing in my life." Another unexpected development was the evolution of my relationship with Allison. What had begun as co-parenting support during a crisis gradually shifted into something new. Not a rekindling of our marriage, we had both changed too much for that, but a deep friendship and partnership that benefited Lucas immensely. When her company offered her a permanent position in their Boston office, she accepted, moving into a condo just 15 minutes from our house. We established a more balanced custody arrangement, with Lucas spending weeknights with me and weekends with her, allowing us both to be fully present in his life while maintaining our separate homes and identities. 6 months after the court case, I found a support group for parents dealing with toxic family relationships. Sharing my story with others who truly understood was cathartic, and their perspectives helped me process the complex emotions I still harbored, the anger, grief, and occasional guilt that would surface unexpectedly. "You didn't cut them off because they asked for money," my friend Derek from the group reminded me. "You cut them off because they endangered your child. That's a line no one gets to cross. Not even parents." By Lucas's 9th birthday, the shadows had largely receded from his eyes. We celebrated with a space-themed party that reflected his growing obsession with astronomy. Watching him laugh with his friends, I realized that children's resilience, when supported with love and proper care, is truly remarkable. That evening, after the last guest had gone home, Allison and I sat on the porch swing, watching the stars emerge. "I never thanked you properly," I said, "for dropping everything and coming when Lucas needed you." She smiled. "You would have done the same. Besides, it ended up changing my life too, in ways I never expected. For the better, I hope?" "Definitely for the better." As we sat in comfortable silence, I reflected on the painful journey of the past year. My family of origin had shattered beyond repair, but from those broken pieces, a stronger, healthier family had emerged, one built on respect, boundaries, and genuine love rather than obligation and manipulation. Lucas would grow up knowing that true family protects each other, speaks truth, and values each member's well-being above all else. He would understand that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is set firm boundaries, even when society pressures you to forgive and forget at all costs. Most importantly, he would know with absolute certainty that he was loved unconditionally, that his worth wasn't tied to compliance or performance, and that his father would always put his safety and well-being first, no matter the cost. That, I realized, was the most profound lesson in this painful chapter. Real family isn't defined by blood or DNA but by love, respect, and the conscious choice to protect those who depend on you, even when that means standing against those who should have protected you. As I look back on that terrible day when Lucas was abandoned, I can now see it as the moment when generational patterns of dysfunction in my family were finally broken. Though the price was high, the freedom on the other side, for both Lucas and myself, has been worth every difficult step of the journey. What do you think about setting boundaries with family? Have you ever had to make a difficult choice to protect yourself or your children? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please like and subscribe for more real-life experiences. And remember, sometimes the family we choose is more important than the family we're born into. Thank you for listening to my story, and I wish you strength and clarity in your own family relationships.